Hello, my name's Sam. I'm with Labour Outlook. As many people watching will have heard, the Policing, Crime, Courts and Sentencing Bill is currently passing through the House of Lords. When it first arrived in Parliament, the bill included a host of measures designed to crack down on protests and attack the Gypsy, Roma and Traveller community. This week, the Lords voted down some of the most reactionary measures in the bill, but there's still a huge fight to defeat it and defend the right to protest. Today I'm joined by Luke from Tower Hamlets Extinction Rebellion, and he's also involved in the wider campaign to kill the bill, to talk about why the government are passing this legislation, why it's bad, and what we can do to campaign against it. So thanks so much for joining me today, Luke.
Thanks for having me.
Cool.
See you.
Okay, so the first question then, why are the government trying to pass this legislation? What are they hoping to achieve with it, and how does it relate to the campaign you've been doing with Extinction Rebellion?
Sure, thanks very much. So I think first of all, I think it's very clear that this legislation is quite targeted in certain ways at some very successful, in my view, recent waves of protest, most specifically Extinction Rebellion and then the Black Lives Matter movement. So you can actually see in the legislation almost specific clauses and offences that relate to specific events in the world, right? So probably most notably, the incredible toppling of the Colston statue in Bristol was a kind of historic event, very important piece of protest. And that's directly addressed in the bill by a new measure, which means you could get up to 10 years in jail for defacing a memorial, with memorial being incredibly widely defined. So, and I guess another one, Extinction Rebellion, for example, protests against the high-speed 2 rail line, and you can see that there's a clause specifically about major transport works. So very clearly they feel threatened by these movements, and I think they feel threatened by these movements because they challenge the power. They challenge the power of the elite and the establishment, right? The Black Lives Matter movement is challenging white supremacy. Extinction Rebellion is challenging, the kind of interwoven kind of polluter, and the power of established elites and their how interlinked they are with the fossil fuel economy essentially, and the current way of doing things. So I think that's very clear. And I think they're also threatened by the fact that there is public support for this stuff, right? And I think we've seen this in most specifically probably in jury trials. So again, the recent Colston 4 were recently found not guilty by a jury. And also with Extinction Rebellion, we've seen almost every time that Extinction Rebellion have gone before a jury. So there was the case last year where people went to Shell head offices, right, which is one of the world's biggest polluters, right? It's got an incredible amount to answer for. It's a deeply, deeply evil corporation, and they went to the head office and they spray painted it and they smashed the windows and they defaced it. And they didn't deny doing any of that, but the jury said not guilty because they said it's proportionate. The jury was essentially saying this is an evil corporation that's got a lot to answer for. Their actions were proportionate to that, and I think the government's scared by that, right? And I think secondly, I'd just say that I think it's also, I think in a way they're also trying to use the unpopularity of some of these protests. So maybe most notably for that, like Insulate Britain and some of the things XR's done, which have been more unpopular in the public sphere. And I think they're trying to use that as part of a wider authoritarian push. So they know that they can try and exploit it. And you see this in their rhetoric, trying to isolate protesters as extremists or terrorists and all this kind of stuff. And then they can use that as part of this wider push to clamp down on opposition to them in a variety of mediums. We're also seeing they want to review the Human Rights Act, right? They want to introduce this Nationalities and Borders Bill, which among other things will make it easier for the government to strip people's citizenship, which is a very, very scary thing. So I think it's part of this broader thing where the government is trying to basically clamp down on opposition.
I think it's right to kind of situate it in the sort of broader that broader kind of framework of actually because we saw the Chiz bill, we also saw the Overseas Operations bill and all those sorts of things. Obviously this is the Tories trying to use the state to persecute kind of protesters and people's way of life further. But I mean, XR is also not it's not a new thing that the government have tried to use the powers that already exist to them, right, in order to stop you guys from protesting. Is that right? I'm thinking about London and the use of kind of the zoning, all that sort of thing.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, there have been multiple cases where the police have massively overstepped the mark, and it's been subsequently ruled that that was illegal. So
Mm.
in October 2019, there's something called a Section 14, which like puts
That's what I was
conditions
thinking
on a
of. Yeah.
protest. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
So essentially, this can be used for all sorts of things, but the idea is that you'd have conditions on a protest in a certain area that would define it in a certain location. And what they did in October 2019 was to say that the only legal place that you can protest in the whole of London is Trafalgar Square, and they imposed the Section 14 on the whole of London.
You talked a kind of bit about the kind of overview of the sort of the strategic overview, really, like of the politics behind all of this. I wonder if you mind going into some more detail about what the bill actually says.
Yeah, sure. So I mean, there's different elements to this. So I think in the original bill, some of the scariest things were conditions being able to be imposed on the noise levels of protest. And that worried a lot of people. Obviously, protest needs noise. In Extinction Rebellion, we have these great samba bands who make loads and loads of noise. It's brilliant, and they keep going for hours. But any protest that relies on noise and it relies on energy and all that kind of stuff. And this idea that a senior police officer could tell you you're being too loud, you're being too, you're bothering us, basically, you're bothering the public, is like, quite frankly, in London, the city that's full of noise all the time from building works and this stuff, the fact that, it's noise from protest is like somehow disrupting the community to such an extent that, that it needs to be made illegal is quite scary. So that was one that bothered people quite a lot. I think another very important one actually is, I mentioned earlier about the Section 14 in London that was imposed, far too widely. So one of the key changes was that currently the police have to be able to show that you are aware of the Section 14, right? So that you have to be told about it before they can arrest you, or if they hand you a piece of paper with it on and you look at it, and then basically you have to know. They have to be able to show that that you've broken a condition in order to arrest you for it. Under some of the changes proposed by the bill, that can be it's only the case that it has to be like reasonable that you should have known. So that means that if you're in an area of a protest, if you're just walking through, if you're basically a bit clueless about it and you're carrying a flag, whatever, police officers then got grounds to say, well, I don't need to prove whether you knew or not. I just need to say that you should have known, right? You're in central London and you were wearing a sticker or carrying a flag, or you looked a bit dodgy. And there's always like a racialized element to this as well, and the way that police target minorities and stuff. So there's kind of always that element. So as I said, I think it just gives you an indication of the way that they're going and the way they think as well, right? So they're trying to convince people that it's protesters versus ordinary people, or Gypsy, Roma, Traveller people versus like ordinary people.
It's that sort of salami slicing of opposition, isn't it? But
yeah.
But like you said, though, I mean, there have been those kind of victories in terms of pushing things back on the House of Lords, and I think you're right to say that that's definitely because of people coming out on the streets and protesting and lobbying and all the rest of it. So on that kind of final question, then, how can people get more involved with Extinction Rebellion? How can they get more involved in the Kill the Bill campaign, and what can they do to help?
Sure. So I'll start with kind of Kill the Bill kind of cross movement stuff first of all. So you can follow Kill the Bill official on Instagram. That's one of our main channels. Also on Twitter and other kinds of stuff. So there will definitely be more street protests, right? So if you follow our Instagram, if you follow our other channels, you'll see about these. Then in terms of Extinction Rebellion, I just say join the rebellion. So we're still in open rebellion against the UK government. That's what it said in the posters way back in 2018, and it's still true. There's going to be another big street mobilization in April of this year. So yeah, look on the website, join your local group, join the mailing list, and then come out on the streets. We're going to positively exercise the right to protest in like as beautiful and musical and exciting and radical way as we possibly can. So
listen, thanks so much for chatting to me, and and if you're watching out there, make sure you get involved in your kind of local Kill the Bill group and in your local, and you join the rebellion, and see you soon. Thanks.